John chapter 11 this morning. We'll begin reading in verse 1. Now a certain man was sick named Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore his sisters sent unto him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. When he had heard, therefore, that he was sick, he abode 2 days still in the same place where he was. Then after that he said to his disciples, Let us go into Judea again. His disciples say unto him, Master, the Jews of late sought to stone thee, and goest thou thither again? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If any man walk in the day, he stumbleth not, because he seeth the light of this world. But if a man walk in the night, he stumbleth, because there is no light in him. These things said he, and after that he saith unto them, Our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may wake him out of sleep. Then said his disciples, Lord, if he sleep, he shall do well. Howbeit Jesus spake of his death, but they thought that he had spoke of taking rest and sleep. Then said Jesus unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent that ye may believe. Nevertheless, let us go unto him. Then said Thomas, which is called Didymus, unto his fellow disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him. And when Jesus came, he found that he had lain in the grave 4 days already. Now Bethany was nigh unto Jerusalem, about 15 furlongs off. And many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary sat still in the house. Then said Martha unto Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. But I know that even now whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee. Jesus said unto her, Thy brother shall rise again. Martha said unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whomsoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this? She said unto him, Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world. And when she had so said, she went her way and called Mary her sister secretly, saying, The Master is come and calleth for thee. As soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came unto him. Now Jesus was not yet come into the town, but was in that place where Martha met him. The Jews then which were come with her into the house and comforted her, when they saw Mary, that she rose up hastily and went out, followed her, saying, She goeth unto the grave to weep there. And when Mary was come where Jesus was, and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying unto him, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in the spirit, and was troubled, and said, Where have ye laid him? They said unto him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. Then said the Jews, Behold, how he loved him. And some of them said, Could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind have caused that even this man should not have died? Jesus, therefore, again groaning in himself, cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Jesus said, Take ye away the stone. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, saith unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days. Jesus said unto her, Said I not unto thee, that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. And I knew that thou hearest me always. But because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. And when he had thus spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus saith unto them, Loose him and let him go. And many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen the things which Jesus did believed on him. We'll stop there, though the passage goes on to explain a little bit more that we might get into a little bit later. But I want to draw your attention to a phrase that the Jews used of Jesus in verse 36. They said, Behold how he loved him. John, who's writing this gospel, goes through great lengths to make sure that we understand the love of Jesus for Lazarus. Over and over and over it is said, he loved him, he loved him, he loved him, he loved him. He loved Martha, he loved Mary, he loved Lazarus, he loved them. Even Jesus says, our friend Lazarus. In the beginning, it says there was this man who was sick, and it says that verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. And when they're at the tomb, it even takes, we put it as its own verse. The verses aren't inspired, but it's a whole sentence John takes to say, Jesus wept. It's important that you know this. And then he goes back and he says he was groaning in his spirit. This was twice it said that he's groaning in his spirit, that this is something that affected him deeply. This is not something that was nothing to Jesus. It was not lost on him. Now he knows that Lazarus is about to be raised from the dead, but he's weeping and crying over the pain and sorrow that he knows already exists. All the pain that Lazarus had to go to when he died. The pain and sorrow that Mary and Martha are experiencing. If you've ever lost someone close to you, you understand the pain and sorrow that Mary and Martha are going through at this moment. And, I've lost people who I cared about greatly, but never one who I cared about who I was very, very close to. My wife's mother passed away several years ago, and I cared about her very much, but I was not close to her. It was not the pain that I had during that time was not like my wife's pain. She was very close to her mother. And so what's interesting here is that Mary and Martha are grieving because of their closeness to Lazarus. And Jesus grieves right along with them. Not just because he cared for Lazarus, but because he cares for those who are close to him, because Jesus is very intimately affected by the death of this man. It shows the love of Jesus. And this is what John emphasizes over and over again in this passage. Why? Because otherwise you could be forgiven for thinking Jesus didn't love him. Because he let him die. Right? And so we're going to talk about this. But John is careful to remind us, Jesus loved him. Jesus loved him. Jesus loved him. He groaned. He wept. He groaned again. There was a great amount of love, so much that you can't even imagine from Jesus towards Lazarus. And I think sometimes when we consider the love of God, we get love a little bit wrongly. Sometimes we think that love means that everything is going to go the way that I want it because God loves me, And when things go the way that I want them to go, I must have favor with God, right? Somebody's on my side. I've got somebody in my court, You'll hear phrases like that. Someone's in good with the man upstairs, right? Well, the idea, that's a completely silly idea when you read John chapter 11. Because here's a man where nothing went the way that he wanted it to go. Two sisters, nothing went the way that they wanted it to go. But it did not mean they were out of favor with God. As a matter of fact, God loved them. And this was expressed over and over again. So I want to ask this question, that the same one that the Jews said as a statement, not a question, but I want to ask the question, how he loved him. How was it that Jesus loved Lazarus? They said, behold how he loved him. What an amazing thing that Jesus loved this man so much. But the very next question that they asked was, why did he let him die? You know, this is jumping forward a bit in the ministry of Christ. We've been kind of preaching messages on Sunday morning through different events in the ministry of Christ, and we had gotten kind of about halfway through his ministry in the time frame. And now we're jumping to this event, which is really only several months before the crucifixion. This is probably about 3, maybe 4 months before the crucifixion when this particular event took place. And that's because there's so much more recorded of the last few months of Jesus' ministry that in order to get it all in before Easter, I had to jump forward a little bit. But now we're in the end. Christ has already demonstrated several things. He's demonstrated that he can heal from a distance, right? Remember the man, actually it was 2 men, 2 different rulers who came to Jesus. One of them had a daughter who was sick, and another had a servant who was sick. And they come to Jesus and ask for healing. And one of the things they find in different instances, each one of them says, look, you don't even have to come to my house. All you have to do is say the word. And Jesus says, okay. And the servant is healed. In both of those instances, it's from a distance. Jesus didn't even have to be there for the healing to take place. And so certainly his disciples know that he could heal Lazarus without being there where Lazarus was, even though most of his miracles did take place when he was present. Why? Because it needed to be obvious to everyone that it was him doing the miracle, right? And someone just suddenly healed and he was miles and miles away, someone could say, well, that was something different. But when he's there laying his hands on them or in person, it's more evident that it's him doing the work, right? Which is why he did these things in person. But let's go back to the portions of this story, because in love, Jesus begins when he hears of this man who he loves, who's sick, and he knows is going to die. The first thing Jesus does is he delays. He remains where he is. Look what it says. John makes sure that we understand that he loves them, but it says, verse 6, as soon as he said that Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, when he had heard, therefore, that he was sick, he abode 2 days in the same place where he was. Now, by the time that the message had gotten to Jesus, we don't know what the distance was between where Jesus was and Bethany. Jesus was somewhere near Jordan, so the best guess is he's probably about a day's journey from Bethany. Now, it took a day for the word to come to Jesus. He waits 2 days. So that would make sense that he's at least a day's journey away. Maybe he was further. But Jesus could have gotten there on time. He could have gotten there, or he could have gotten there earlier. We don't know when he died exactly in this time frame. But he ends up getting there not 1 day or 2 days or 3 days, or he gets there 4 days after death. Now, there's another story where Jesus is not, and when I say story, some people criticize me because they think, well, you're treating it like it's not true. There are true stories. This is a true story, an event that happened when Jesus met a funeral procession coming out of the city. And he laid his hands on the boy, and the boy rose from the dead. But this was a funeral procession. Remember, and this time they didn't wait to bury their dead. They didn't, someone died and, okay, we're going to plan the funeral. We're going to do it on Friday next week or whatever. That's not how they did this. When someone died, they would take them immediately and put them in the grave. They wouldn't leave the body out. So this was someone who was dead with probably less than 24 hours. Now, the Jews had a tradition, and that was that the soul of a person sort of hovers around the body for 3 days, and then after that, in case they come back to life or something, And they did this because there were instances where they thought somebody was dead, and turns out they weren't actually dead. So they would kind of say, well, it's possible, right? There's a resurrection possibility for the first 3 days. But after that, it's over and it's done. The person is never coming back. Of course, the only other resurrection that ever took place was in the Old Testament when somebody was being carried out to be buried, and they were attacked by enemies, and the people carrying the body dropped it into the grave where Elijah was, where his bones were laid. And the person rose from the dead and walked away. But again, within the 24 hours of death. So Jesus waits on purpose 4 days. One extra day beyond the 3-day tradition, right? So that it was very clear this was something he had never done before. They'd never seen it done like this. And he waits 4 days. Or he waits 2 days, but he times it so he shows up there 4 days late. Look at what he says to the disciples. The disciples say, when he says, we're going to go to Judea, the disciples say unto him, verse 8, Master, the Jews of late sought to stone thee, and goest thou thither again? So they said, listen, the Jews in Jerusalem, meaning specifically the leaders of the Jews, they want to kill you. And the disciples are thinking this is why when he hears about Lazarus, he doesn't want to go back towards Jerusalem. Bethany is only a few miles from Jerusalem. He doesn't want to go back towards Jerusalem because he'll be caught and killed. And so they think, okay, that's why he's delaying even though Lazarus is sick. And then he says, after waiting for 2 days, hey, we're going. And they say, well, why are we going? They're going to catch you and kill you. Isn't this... They're probably suggesting, isn't this the reason why you were waiting for the last 2 days? And Jesus is making it clear that's not the reason that he was waiting. And he says, no, Lazarus is asleep, and I'm going to wake him out of sleep. And they said, well, if he was sick, he's sleeping, this is a good thing. He's probably getting better. And Jesus, seeing that they don't understand, said very plainly, Lazarus is dead. And then he adds this phrase, I am glad. I am glad. Lazarus is dead. I am glad. But John makes sure that we understand that it wasn't because Jesus didn't love him. Jesus wanted Lazarus to die, but he also didn't want him to die, right? It pained him. It was something that brought him great sorrow. He loved Lazarus. He loved Mary and Martha. But he waited on purpose and allowed Lazarus to die and said, Lazarus is dead and I am glad. This is something that we can understand about the love of God. The love of God does not mean that everything is going to work out for us the way that we want it to. As a matter of fact, it doesn't mean that we're not going to go through really, 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 really hard things in our life. That's not what the love of God promises. But it does promise this, that when we go through difficulty and trouble and hardship, God could have stopped it and chose not to. And he cares. He does care. It's not that he's sitting back on the sideline, I don't care about that. No, he cares very much about Lazarus. He cares very much about Mary and Martha. And yet, he says, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad. He says, I'm glad for your sakes. And we'll get to that, what that means in just a little bit later on. I'm going to come back around to that. I was glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent ye may believe. Nevertheless, let us go unto him. Then said Thomas, which is called Didymus, unto his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Now notice Thomas isn't brave enough to say this to Jesus, right? He says, no, to the fellow disciples, he says, let us go that we may die with him. Now, but think through the logic. Thomas is using sound reasoning here, okay, from his perspective. He says, the Jews want to kill us. Lazarus is sick. I can see a reason why we might risk the Jews to go heal Lazarus. But now Lazarus is dead, and the Jews still want to kill us, and now we're going to go near Jerusalem, and they're going to catch us and kill us all. So because Lazarus is dead, now the rest of us have to die? Is that what we're doing? Okay, let us go that we may die with him, right? It seems very obvious that he's being tongue-in-cheek, I guess is the phrase here. He's complaining, but he's not doing so to Jesus. He's doing so to the other disciples. If you work at a job where every now and then the employees, and if you're an employee, and you sort of disagree with the boss from time to time, you understand the comment that Thomas is making here. But Jesus delayed. The next thing I want to show you is this. When Jesus comes, he declares his power, which kind of like almost seems like salt in the wound a little bit. Look what happens. Then when Jesus came, verse 17, he found that he had lain in the grave 4 days already. Now Bethany was nigh unto Jerusalem, about 15 furlongs off, which is about a little less than 2 miles. That's how close they are to Jerusalem now. And many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary sat still in the house. Then said Martha unto Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. And she knows the power of Jesus. And she says, Lord, why? If you had been here, he wouldn't be dead right now. We all know this. And she's not asking the question in words, but she's asking the question, why? Is there a purpose to all of this? Verse 22, but I know that even now, whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee. I mean, I know that all you have to do is ask of God. You know, you are God, you're the Messiah. All you have to do is ask, and anything that you want, you can have. You didn't even have to be here, is what she's sort of hinting at. All you had to do was ask for it, and he would have been healed. Jesus saith unto her, Thy brother shall rise again. Now, this was actually true in 2 different ways, wasn't it? Because he was going to rise that very day, but also there's a future resurrection, which is far more important. He's actually drawing out a really important point here, that Lazarus was going to have to die twice now, because he's going to raise him from the dead, and he's going to die again later, right? All of the healing and all of the raising and all of the casting out demons and all of that Jesus did was all temporary unless they came to Christ in faith to receive the real eternal resurrection that was later, right? Everything else was temporary. If Jesus had come and healed Lazarus, Lazarus was still just going to die again later, right? Eventually we all die. Here's the bottom line. Rush Limbaugh, who's now dead, a great man. I used to love listening to his radio program. He used to always say, none of us make it out of here alive. That's a really good point. You know, none of us make it out of here alive. So here we have Jesus pointing out that there is a resurrection that is far more important in the future, even though he's also hinting at what he's about to do that very day. He says, Thy brother shall rise again. Martha says unto him, she gets the second part of that, the future resurrection. Martha saith unto him, I know that he shall rise again at the resurrection at the last day. And she's basically saying, but that doesn't help the hurt that I'm feeling right now. And remember, Jesus understands that. Jesus is feeling that hurt himself. And he says unto her, verse 25, I am the resurrection. It's not that I will raise him. I literally am the resurrection. I am the life. I'm the one who gave life to human beings in the beginning of creation. I created all things. I am the resurrection. I'm the one who's going to raise myself from the dead, and by faith in me, all people have the opportunity to experience the same resurrection. Why? Because I am the resurrection. I am the life. Life, the eternal life that we're looking for, comes from me. He says, he declares who he is and his power. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And so this is an amazing phrase that Jesus is using, that he that believes on Jesus, even though we're headed for death in our bodies, will never really die. Right? He that believes on Jesus, he who's turned to Christ by faith in salvation, will go on living even though we're destined for death, right? Even though this body is going to die, yet shall we live, right? He that liveth and believeth in me, he that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live, and whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. He says, listen, if someone believed in me and he's dead now, he's still alive. And if you believe in me and you're alive now, you're never going to die. Not that you won't die the way Lazarus died. Sure, you'll die that way. But in a far greater sense, you'll never die. And that body will be raised again. The soul, the spirit, is not going to die. So here we go. She says unto him, verse 27, Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world. She says, yes, Lord, I believe all of that. And when she had so said, she went her way and called Mary, her sister, secretly, saying, The Master is come and calleth for thee. Now, we don't know if she was saying that just to get Mary to come, and Jesus didn't actually call for her, or if he did call for her, and it's just not recorded here. But either way, we don't know if Mary had known that Jesus was there and had refused to come, or was waiting for him to call her. But at any rate, Mary comes when Martha tells her that Jesus is calling for her. Look what it says in verse 32. Then when Mary was come where Jesus was, she saw him and fell down at his feet, saying unto him, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. Now this is a bit of the same question, why, but a different attitude. Martha comes and says, why, right? Mary comes and she falls down at his feet. She recognizes his power and his authority. She's not challenging him at all with this question, why? She's just saying, what's going on? Like how? If you had been here, he wouldn't be dead. That's all. I don't know how to ask the next question, but if you had been here, he wouldn't be dead. I know that. And it says this, verse 33. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. And then he said, Where have you laid him? He didn't even respond to Mary. He's groaning in his spirit. He could see the turmoil and the difficulty that they're dealing with here. And just says, Take me to him. And it's interesting that when they get there, Jesus then weeps. He says, Where have you laid him? They said, Come and see. And he just breaks down. He can't even contain it anymore. That one phrase, the shortest verse in English in the Bible, Jesus wept, is so powerful. Jesus, he just can't even contain himself. He's so overcome with emotion. He knows Lazarus is about to rise from the ground, walk out with the grave clothes on him. He's going to have to tell someone to go unwrap him so that he can talk to everybody. This is a wonderful, glorious, amazing day. And Jesus is weeping because he's seeing the suffering and the difficulty, and he's identifying with it. You see, Jesus didn't just come as God. Yes, Jesus is God, but he also is man. It is perfectly true to say Jesus is God, and it's also perfectly true to say Jesus is man. He came as us. He was tempted like as we are in all points, the Bible tells us, yet without sin. He was not. We have not a high priest, Hebrews says, that cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities. There's not a thing that we can go through in our lives that we can't say, Jesus doesn't understand this. He does. He understands. He cares. And as he's explained to Martha, he has the power to take care of it. Right? These are the essential elements, and it leaves us with that question, what do you mean he loved Lazarus? He understood, he felt the pain, he cared, he had the power, and he let him die. And this is the question that they ask. They say, behold how he loved them. And some of them said, verse 37, could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind have caused that even this man should not have died? Jesus therefore again, groaning in himself, cometh to the grave. There was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, said unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh. She's thinking that Jesus wants to go into the grave and see the body, to pay his respects. And she says, it really stinks right now. I mean, we can about a week later, after all the, techniques that they do and the voodoo, whatever it is they do over the bodies in those funeral homes, we can, the bodies still look pretty intact, days later. But remember, this is 4 days after, putting them in the ground, and there's not a whole lot of, it's very costly to put any sort of embalming or things on a body. It's unlikely that they were able to really provide much of that for Lazarus. And so she says, listen, you don't want to go in there right now. It's going to stink really bad, and he's not going to look like what you remember. And surely you know this, Jesus. And he said, said I not unto thee that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God? He says, remember what I told you about all the power that I have, that I am the resurrection and the life. And I asked you if you believed it. I'm asking you now again, do you believe it? You will see the power of God if you will follow my commandments. And this is something interesting, that Jesus didn't ask anything difficult of them, but he did ask something of them, right? It was, roll the stone away. I'm going to ask you to do something, and you're going to have to follow my commandments. Now, what would happen if they had not rolled the stone away? Lazarus would have stayed in the grave. Jesus gave them the opportunity to demonstrate that they do believe him. Enough, not so much that they really thought Lazarus was going to walk out of there, but they believed enough to obey his commands. And this is so important about faith. Sometimes we think that we have to have this faith that just has no doubts whatsoever. And by the way, I think if you're doubting whether you're truly saved, that you should get that settled. You should be confident in that thing. But when it comes to having faith in God, like I never have had a doubt, that's not the faith that Jesus has asked of us. Instead, he's asked that we have enough faith to simply obey what he commands us to do. Right? Even though we may have doubts, we just say, but I have enough faith to obey Jesus. And this is what Martha did. She had her doubts. She didn't know what was going on, but she knew he's the Son of God, and I know he's got power, and I know that if he tells me to do something, I'm going to do it. So I'm going to do it. This is the faith that we're asked to have. Faith that causes us to submit to God, even when everything's going wrong, even when we could say, I'm angry at God. It's your fault. Point my finger at him, right? Instead, in faith, we say, all right, I don't understand this, but I'll obey. That's what Martha did. She, or the disciples did, but Martha finally said, okay, fine, take away the stone. And they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid, and Jesus lifted up his eyes. Look at what he says. Before he calls Lazarus out, he again declares his power. He lifts up his eyes and says, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. Like, you already heard me. He starts the prayer with, thank you for hearing this prayer before I finish the prayer. I know you've already heard me. And he says, and I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they might believe that thou hast sent me. When he had thus spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. Some people say that the reason he had to make sure he said Lazarus first was because if he had just said come forth, all the people in the grave would have come out. And it's true, they did bury multiple, it was a family tombs usually, so this is probably a place where there were multiple bones laid up. in there. They would usually bury the body, and then later, a year later, they'd come back and take the bones and put them in a pile of bones, so that original burial spot in the front of the tomb was open for another body to be laid there. And Jesus says, Lazarus, just Lazarus, Lazarus, come forth. And here he comes. And suddenly, I think in the disciples' minds, they begin to start to see what's going on here. Right? Oh my goodness. He just brought back a man who was dead for 4 days, back to life. Here he is. He's walking out, and you can see everyone's just like, what? What is going on? And Jesus has to sort of break them of their stupor, and he says, because Lazarus is bound hand and foot with wrappings, and Jesus says, someone going to loose him and let him go? Somebody take the grave clothes off of him so that he can talk and see everybody. This is amazing, and it shows the purpose, right? And this is, I think, the final thought that I'll give you to conclude, that there was a purpose. Go back with me to the beginning of chapter 11 there, in verse 15. Or actually, you can even go before that, in verse 4. When Jesus heard that he was sick, he said, "This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby." He says, it's not unto death except for the purpose. Like, it is unto death, but it's not unto the death just for the purpose of death. It's unto death for the glory of God. And he says, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. By the way, the glory of God and the glory of Jesus, the Son of God, are the same because Jesus is God, right? Then he says this in verse 15, I am glad, Jesus said unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent that ye may believe. And he repeats it again in his prayer to Jesus, to the Father. Jesus says, verse 42, and I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by, I said that they may believe that thou hast sent me. Now, originally when I was studying this, I thought maybe we had two purposes here, the glory of God and so that people believe. But the more I considered this, I really feel like these are the same thing, actually. What is the glory of God? When God is glorified, who he is seen to other people. You know, that's what the glory of God is. So that when we believe on God, we are glorifying God by recognizing who he is. And these are really one and the same thing. The whole purpose here was so that we might believe, so that they might believe, so that they could see who he was, the power that he had. There is no one who can raise someone from the dead. There's lots of miracles that are done throughout the scripture, but nobody raises the dead but God, right? Somebody can do a magic trick and come out with, make you think that they're healing somebody or this or that, but you can't raise a guy who's been dead for 4 days from the grave if you are not God. And that's what Jesus was demonstrating. His power, his authority, and the people around, they believe. A few of them run to the Pharisees. It says, verse 47, they gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees. They gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees a council and said, what do we, for this man doeth many miracles? You think? He just raised a guy from the dead after he'd been dead for 4 days. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him. You think? He's raising people from the dead. And the Romans will come and take away both our place and nation. Look what it says just a few verses later. It says, let's see, and one of them being Caiaphas, being the high priest that same year, said unto them, ye know nothing at all. He actually ends up prophesying that Jesus is going to die, but he's really trying to rally support to kill Jesus. And it says that the chief priests actually wanted to kill Lazarus. It says that, let's see, now consider verse number 53. Then from that day forth they took counsel together for to put him to death. Jesus walked no more openly among the Jews, but went thence into a country near to the wilderness in a city called Ephraim, and there continued with his disciples. And the Jews' Passover was nigh at hand, and many went out of the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. Then sought they for Jesus, and spake among themselves as they stood in the temple, what think ye that he will come to the feast? Now both the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a commandment that if any man knew where he was, he might show it, that they might take him. And it's actually in the next chapter where Jesus is again in Bethany, and we'll deal with this next week. But again, it says that the Jews are looking to try to kill Lazarus because by him many people are believing. And it's funny because what are you going to do? Jesus just raised him from the dead. You're going to kill him again? What is he? He's just going to raise him from the dead again. Like, how do you beat somebody who raises people from the dead? And this is the problem that the Pharisees have. But Jesus is stirring up the Pharisees on purpose because this is a few months before he is to be crucified. And this has to happen. And so he's purposely doing this. And by the way, the people, when he comes back around to Lazarus' house again, it's the very next day that he's going to enter into the city, riding on a donkey. And when he comes back around the next time, all the Jews are there because they want to meet Jesus, who raised Lazarus, and they want to meet Lazarus, who was dead for 4 days. What was it like being dead for 4 days, Lazarus? They get to ask him those questions. And they see Jesus there, back there again. And what are they doing the very next day? They're going and grabbing palm branches and throwing them in the street and saying, Hosanna, and the highest, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. So you see, Jesus is setting up everything in prophecy, everything that must happen. There's so much that is resting on this moment. Everything, this had to happen the way that it happened. Lazarus had to die. He had to be dead for 4 days. And Jesus had to raise him from the dead. All of God's plan and all of his purpose was going exactly perfectly. But Jesus is weeping because it's not always easy for us to go through God's plan. All of this is a wonderful thing, but Mary and Martha didn't think it was so wonderful for those 4 days. No, it was very hard. It was very difficult. But wasn't it so much better that they had to go through it because God's plan was accomplished? And this is why I say, behold how he loved them. Jesus did not love him in the sense that he was going to make everything perfect the way that they wanted it. Rather, he loved him so much that when, even in the plan of God, things were very difficult for them, he cared for them. He identified with the difficulty, with the trouble. He announced his power. He was not without the ability to help. And then he accomplished his purpose. Right? He went ahead and accomplished his purpose. And Romans 8:28 says this, for we know that all things work together for good, to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. You know, this thing that you're going through is not necessarily good for your purpose. Right? When we go through dark times, it's not my purpose isn't being accomplished. And sometimes people read that verse wrong. Everything's going to work out to your purposes. And the answer is no. But everything is good if you want God's purpose, because God's purpose is always being done. Colossians says that Jesus literally upholds all things by the word of his power, meaning that nothing could actually exist for even a split second if Jesus decided it wouldn't exist. You know? If a bank robber comes into a bank and takes out a gun and shoots the gun at somebody, as that bullet is flying through the air, Jesus is upholding the laws of gravity and of science to allow the bullet to continue. If he didn't uphold it, it would stop. It would disappear out of existence. Everything exists because Jesus allows it to exist. And then the bullet strikes somebody and that person dies. And someone says, well, that's God's fault. Well, if you want to look at it that way, I suppose you could. But everyone's going to die someday because of our sin, right? That's not God's fault. Jesus is in charge of everything. Literally everything that happens to us. He could stop. He has to allow it to continue or it wouldn't be continuing, you know? When Job was plagued with diseases and he had lost all of his children, God had to allow that to happen. Satan couldn't just come and attack Job. God had to say, yes, I'm going to let that happen because it's going to accomplish my purpose. And this is a hard fact. But it's not so difficult when we understand ourselves and what we deserve. Because here's how we look at life. I deserve goodness from God. It's kind of the default way we look at things, isn't it? But that's not true at all. We deserve justice and wrath and condemnation from God. The fact that we're here breathing is His mercy. Not something that we are owed, right? And the fact that we can have salvation and resurrection in the future is His mercy. It's not something that He owes us. It's something that out of love He's given us. And hasn't He given us so much from that perspective? When we realize what we deserve versus what we have, that's when we see the love of God. This is why when Martha comes to Jesus and says, if you hadn't been here, he wouldn't have died. And Jesus says, but don't you realize what you have? You have resurrection one day. Now, it happened to be that it was that day that Lazarus was going to be raised. But all believers, Martha included, have resurrection one day. What does it matter if you lose a little thing? Does that mean that God doesn't love you anymore? No. It means that He has still given you far more than what you deserve. He's still in charge. He's still in control. Father in heaven, I thank you for your love. Forgive us for questioning your love when things don't go according to our plans. Lord, rather help us to return to you as Mary did, falling at your feet, knowing that you care. You are touched with the feelings of our infirmities. You know how difficult it is, and there's no way you would allow us to go through difficulty if it wasn't for the purpose that is far, far, far greater than our own. Your purposes. Lord, forgive us for this entitlement attitude that we've taken towards you so many times, as if you owe us your goodness. It's all of your grace. It's all of your mercy. None of it is deserved. And we thank you, Lord, for your love. In Jesus' name. With our heads bowed and eyes closed, let's consider this passage and the impact it has on the way we view the love of God. I'm going to play this song one time through as you pray and deal with whatever it is that the Lord has put on your heart from this passage. If you need to repent of something, then do that now. If you need to just thank God for His love, if you need to realign your thinking in a certain area, take some time to ask God to help you with that while we play this song. His name is wonderful.